I remember the exact moment when I realized I was no longer willing to live someone else's version of my life. My name is Jordan Westwood, and I am 34 years old. For as long as I can recall, I have been the dependable one, the sibling who silently set aside personal desires to keep the family machine running smoothly. I grew up in a modest farmhouse just outside Guelph, Ontario, where my parents, Marjorie and Stephen, instilled in me the belief that family loyalty is the highest virtue. My older brother Damien always seemed to glide through life under a spotlight of admiration. He was charismatic, charming, and effortlessly drew people to him. Meanwhile, I thrived in the background, organizing our mother's birthday dinners, managing calendars, and quietly repairing every problem no one else noticed. By my late 20s, I had built a stable career in finance. I joined Westgrove Capital in downtown Toronto as an entry-level analyst, quickly advancing to senior portfolio manager. I poured myself into quarterly forecasts, risk assessments, and client meetings. My days blurred into nights, each marked by the steady glow of spreadsheets and the hum of fluorescent office lights. It was secure, it was respectable, yet I felt imprisoned in a golden cage I had designed for myself. One evening, after a particularly grueling week, my doctor delivered a stark warning. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and the relentless stress was pushing me toward burnout. That night, back in my one-bedroom apartment, I retrieved a journal I had kept hidden for years. Its pages were filled with magazine clippings of remote beaches, postcards of the Amalfi Coast, and hand-drawn sketches of New Zealand's rugged landscapes. I ran my finger over the map of South Island, feeling a surge of longing I could no longer ignore. As the clock rolled past midnight, I opened my laptop and began booking flights. I mapped out a journey that would carry me from the rolling hills of New Zealand through Australia's sun-baked outback and end in the lavender fields of Provence, France. I reserved stays at family-run inns, scheduled guided hikes through national parks, and even signed up for a 2-week culinary course in a small Provençal village. The total cost exceeded everything I had saved, and the non-refundable deposits amounted to thousands of dollars. Yet for the first time in my life, spending that money felt like the truest investment in myself. The following morning, I met my best friend Priya at our favorite coffee shop on Queen West. She was the only person I trusted to share my secret. When I slid my itinerary across the table, her eyes lit up. "Jordan, this is incredible," she said, voice trembling with excitement. "About time you did something for you. You've been holding your breath for years." Encouraged by Priya's enthusiasm, I decided to tell my family at our annual summer barbecue. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the scent of grilled corn mingled with the laughter of children playing in the yard. I took a deep breath and announced my departure dates from the 1st of June through the 15th of July. I expected congratulations, or at least curiosity, but the reaction was far from celebratory. My mother's smile flickered and then froze. She glanced at her potato salad as if searching for a distraction. My father shifted uncomfortably, his fork hovering above the plate. Damien simply raised an eyebrow, as if measuring what this meant for him personally. Finally, my mother forced a polite response. "That sounds lovely, dear. Just make sure you stay safe." I drove home that evening with a knot in my chest. Their lukewarm reaction stung more than any outright objection could have. It became clear that my choice to embark on this journey was seen not as an act of self-care, but as a betrayal of family norms. In that moment, I realized that the path I was choosing would demand more than courage. It would require me to redefine my place in the only family I had ever known. And as I lay in bed that night, the hum of the city outside my window, I whispered to myself, "This is the beginning." The morning after my confrontation with my family, I awoke to a restless mind and a suitcase still half packed by the door. Sunlight filtered through my Toronto apartment window, illuminating the scattering of travel maps and boarding passes on my desk. I brewed a strong cup of dark roast coffee and settled at the table, determined to steel myself for the fallout I knew was coming. By midday, my phone buzzed with a text from Damien. "Hey, world traveller, heard about your grand adventure. Mum's hosting a family picnic on June 1st. Any chance you'll postpone?" His words hit like a dart. A picnic on June 1st, my first travel day, felt absurd in its timing. I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm sorry, Damien, but these dates are locked in. Deposits are non-refundable." His response was swift and curt. "Figures. Enjoy your once-in-a-lifetime trip." I closed my eyes, swallowed the sting, and reminded myself why I was doing this. This journey was about more than sightseeing, it was about reclaiming my life. That afternoon, I met Priya at our favourite cafe on Queen West, a cosy spot with mismatched chairs and the best pistachio latte in the city. She eyed my tense shoulders the moment I sat down. "They're pressuring you, aren't they?" I nodded, stirring my latte absent-mindedly. "They think I owe them my summer, as if my dreams are negotiable." Priya reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You owe them nothing, Jordan." "You owe yourself everything." Her words fueled my resolve. I spent the rest of the day double-checking reservations, printing copies of my itinerary, and watching a live map track my flight's departure. Each click and confirmation felt like a hammer striking at invisible chains. That evening, I drove out to my parents' farmhouse in Guelph for one last visit before I left. The drive through winding, tree-lined roads felt both comforting and surreal. In the kitchen, the aroma of roast chicken and fresh-baked bread greeted me. My mother, Marjorie, offered a tight smile as I entered. "Jordan, you decided to come after all," she said, her voice guarded. I hugged her and managed a small smile. "I wanted to see you before I go." We sat at the long oak table, its surface worn smooth by decades of family meals. My father cleared his throat, exchanging a glance with my mother. "We're really proud of your career, son," he began. "But this picnic, your sister's graduation celebration, means a lot. Wouldn't it be better to stay home with us?" I inhaled, recalling the exercises Dr. Kendall had taught me. Acknowledge feelings, then firmly assert your choice. I looked at my father. "Dad, I love you all more than anything, but this graduation and picnic will happen again next year. My 6-week trip to New Zealand, Australia, and France will not. I need this." Silence settled. My mother's knife hovered over her plate. Damien's eyes flashed reproach. Finally, Marjorie whispered, "We'll miss you." Driving back to the city under a velvet sky, I felt both relief and a pang of sorrow. I was leaving behind everything familiar and everyone I loved. Yet I carried within me a flicker of hope that by claiming my own path, I could return as someone stronger and more authentic. On the morning of June 1st, I stood at the airport terminal with my passport and boarding pass in hand. My heart thundered with anticipation. As I stepped onto the plane, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Here's to choosing me." When the wheels of the Airbus touched down in Auckland, a rush of exhilaration coursed through me. The crisp New Zealand air felt electric as I stepped off the plane onto foreign tarmac. My journey had begun. I collected my backpack, exchanged a few Kiwis at the airport kiosk, and boarded a shuttle bound for the rolling green hills of Matamata, home of the famed Hobbiton movie set. The shuttle wound along narrow roads flanked by emerald pastures dotted with grazing sheep. Every mile carried me farther from the life I had known, yet, paradoxically, closer to something I had always yearned for, myself. As the bus slowed into the small town, I felt a flutter of nerves. What if I couldn't navigate foreign roads? What if I regretted leaving my stable career and familiar routines? I chided myself for entertaining such doubts. After all, I had prepared thoroughly, booked lodging in advance, and mastered the local bus schedules. My first stop was a family-run bed and breakfast perched atop a gentle hill overlooking the Shire-like countryside. The owners, a kindly couple named Ella and Hamish, greeted me with warm smiles and cups of steaming peppermint tea. Their sincerity dissolved my nerves instantly. We chatted about local legends, the best hiking trails, and where to find authentic Kiwi fish and chips. Ella pressed a spare map into my hand. "You'll want this," she said. "Trust me, the byways have surprises." Late that afternoon, I set out on a short hike through a nearby native forest. Fern fronds unfurled in the golden light, and birdsong wove a tapestry of calm around me. I paused at a small clearing where wildflowers carpeted the ground. Pulling out my journal, I recorded not only what I saw, but how I felt, an unfamiliar lightness in my chest, as if every breath was no longer borrowed but wholly mine. That evening, back at the B&B, I joined fellow travellers in the cosy sitting room. There was Arman, a quiet software engineer from Mumbai, taking a sabbatical to learn Maori wood carving, and May, a backpacker from Shanghai, tracing her ancestral roots in the southern hemisphere. We shared stories over hearty lamb stew and laughed over mismatched socks. She had packed light, but somehow brought 3 pairs of the same colour. Arman and I struck up a deeper conversation by the wood-burning stove. He confided that he, too, felt trapped in a life designed by others' expectations. His family had urged him to pursue medicine, but he found solace in code and creative crafts. "Sometimes," he said softly, "you have to redraw the map of your own life." His words echoed my own journey and affirmed that I was not alone in this quest for autonomy. The next morning, I rose at dawn to capture sunrise over Lake Rotorua. A gentle mist hovered above the water as the sky blushed pink and gold. Setting up my camera tripod on the shoreline, I pressed the shutter again and again, each click a small victory. Later, I wandered through the geothermal parks, marveling at steaming vents and bubbling mud pools. In the earth's raw heat, I sensed a symbolic cleansing of old fears. By the end of my 3rd day, the initial thrill had matured into a steady, gratifying presence. I no longer felt like an imposter in my own life, but rather its author. With each passing hour, the whispers of self-doubt faded beneath the roar of discovery. New Zealand had opened its arms to me, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next, whether it was rugged cliffs, remote vineyards, or simply a moment of quiet reflection beneath a starlit sky. After my transformative days in New Zealand, I boarded a flight to Sydney, Australia. As the aircraft descended over the city's glittering skyline, I felt a renewed sense of possibility. Sydney was a vibrant crossroads of cultures, and I was eager to immerse myself in its energy before heading into the outback. My first stop was a small Airbnb in Newtown, an eclectic neighbourhood known for its street art and independent cafes. The host, Aisha, welcomed me with a tray of homemade flat white and avocado toast topped with microgreens. "You'll find inspiration around every corner," she said with a wink. I spent the afternoon wandering alleyways painted with murals, a towering kangaroo rendered in neon hues, a wall of spray-painted ferns, and quotes in looping script that read, "Adventure begins at the edge of your comfort zone." I paused at each mural, jotting reflections in my journal about the art's power to awaken the soul. The next morning, I joined a small group tour headed west toward the Blue Mountains. The coach carved through eucalyptus forests until we reached a lookout platform overlooking the famed Three Sisters rock formation. As mist wreathed the cliffs, our guide, Thomas, spoke softly of Aboriginal Dreamtime stories that imbued the landscape with sacred meaning. I closed my eyes and let the ancient rhythms of the earth sink into me. Our hike traced narrow stone pathways along the escarpment, plunging into valleys where waterfalls thundered into fern-lined pools. I felt muscles I didn't know I had as I scrambled over moss-covered boulders. At one point, I slipped and scraped my knee on jagged rock. Instead of panic, a calm rose within me. I wrapped my scarf around the wound and kept moving, more determined than ever. Bruised and exhilarated, I reached a hidden waterfall pool and paused to soak in its icy spray. In that moment, I realized that discomfort and growth were intertwined, that pushing beyond pain often led to the richest discoveries. Returning to Sydney at dusk, I made my way to Darling Harbour, where lights danced off the water and laughter echoed from waterfront bars. I treated myself to grilled barramundi and a glass of crisp semillon, savouring every bite as though it were a chapter in my new life. Between courses, I struck up a conversation with Liam, a photographer who had spent months documenting coastal towns. He offered to show me some of his favourite vantage points atop the Sydney Harbour Bridge the following morning. Under a pastel sunrise, Liam and I met at the bridge's arch. He shared tips on framing shots to capture both the city's grandeur and its intimate details. A sailboat drifting past Opera House, sunlit by dawn, the ripple patterns on the harbour's choppy waves. We climbed higher, and at the summit I looked out over Sydney's expanse with a breathless mix of awe and gratitude. The city throbbed with life, yet I felt a quiet solidity within myself, as though I had anchored my own purpose. That afternoon I packed my gear for the next leg of my journey, a flight to the Red Centre and the heart of Australia's spiritual outback. As I closed my suitcase, I reflected on how far I'd already come, from the rolling hills of New Zealand to the vibrant pulse of Sydney. And I smiled, ready for the next chapter of discovery. Stepping off the small turboprop at Ayers Rock Airport, I felt the heat hit me like a wave. The outback was alive with colour, ochre sands stretching to the horizon, punctuated by tufts of spinifex grass and the distant silhouette of Uluru rising from the earth like a sentinel of time. I loaded my backpack into the rental four-wheel drive and set off down the dusty road toward Ulara, the resort town at the edge of the national park. My lodgings were rustic cabins with corrugated tin roofs and canvas awnings, arranged in a semicircle around a central courtyard. That evening, the resort hosted a Sounds of Silence dinner, an open-air feast on a sand dune where guests listened to a didgeridoo performance as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned every shade of pink and purple. I sat cross-legged on a woven mat, savouring tender grilled kangaroo fillet and roasted vegetables as the guide shared Aboriginal creation stories tied to the Red Rock. With each tale, I felt a profound sense of connection to this ancient land and its people. The next morning before dawn, I joined a small group guided by Wati, an elder of the Anangu people whose ancestors have lived here for millennia. We hiked a loop around Uluru's base, stopping at sacred rock crevices where artwork spoke of ancestral beings. Wati explained that Uluru changes color with the light, glowing deep crimson at sunrise, fading to fiery orange by midday, and melting into purple shadows at dusk. As the sky lightened, I watched the rock blush with the first rays of sun and felt tears prick my eyes. Here was a monument older than any empire, witnessing centuries of storms and celebrations, and I was privileged to witness its dawn ritual. Later, I drove further west to Kata Chuta, the many heads of a nearby rock formation, also known as the Olgas. The Valley of the Winds walk took us through narrow gorges and across windswept plateaus where the air itself seemed to whisper ancient secrets. I paused to record my thoughts in the journal, the wind tugging at the pages, reminding me that life, like this landscape, was shaped by relentless forces and quiet persistence. That afternoon, I explored the Field of Light, an art installation by Bruce Monroe consisting of tens of thousands of illuminated spheres strewn across the desert. At dusk, the lamps flickered on, transforming the barren plain into a galaxy of gentle, glowing orbs. Walking among the lights, I remembered the doubts and fears I had carried from Toronto. Fear of disappointment, fear of failure, fear of being judged for choosing myself. Here, surrounded by this luminous dreamscape, those fears felt insignificant. As the installation's lights dimmed under the vast canopy of stars, I walked back to my cabin and gazed at the Milky Way, so bright it seemed within arm's reach. I closed my eyes and inhaled the dry, fragrant air, feeling grounded yet unbounded. In those silent moments I understood that the journey was reshaping me, carving new paths in my heart as surely as wind and rain sculpt the outback. That night I drifted to sleep with the distant call of a night parrot echoing outside, nature's lullaby in a land that refused to sleep. When I awoke, I knew I would carry the outback's lessons with me, the beauty of immense stillness, the power of stories older than memory, and the courage to stand firm under any sky. And as I packed my bags for the next flight to Provence, I felt ready to embrace the final chapter of my odyssey. Touching down in Marseille, France, felt like stepping into a postcard. The sky was a flawless cerulean, and the air carried salty tangs from the nearby Mediterranean. I collected my suitcase and caught a shuttle to Aix-en-Provence, a town famed for its fountains, pastel facades, and lavender markets. As the bus wound through sun-drenched vineyards, I felt an almost surreal gratitude. I had journeyed from Ontario to New Zealand, Australia, and now the storied fields of Provence, all on my own terms. My home for the next 2 weeks was a centuries-old farmhouse nestled among olive groves outside a small village called Loris. Its stone walls were cool beneath my fingertips, and climbing roses framed each shuttered window. The owner, Monsieur Laurent, welcomed me with a flourish of his weathered hand. "Bienvenue, mademoiselle," he said, offering a basket woven from grapevines and filled with freshly baked baguettes, local chèvre, and a bottle of rosé. "Here, taste the terroir." I set out that afternoon to explore the village market in Apt, where stalls overflowed with lavender bundles, honey jars, and Provençal soaps scented with verbena and thyme. Artisans displayed ceramic bowls painted in sun-warmed hues, and vendors sold slices of pissaladière, onion tarts fragrant with rosemary and anchovies. I paused at one stall to sample tapenade made by an elderly couple who taught me the proper way to crush olives with a mortar and pestle. Their laughter was warm as the sunlight, and I scribbled their recipe in my journal, thinking how food, like travel, connects hearts across language barriers. Each morning I rose before dawn to join a small cooking class taught by Chef Camille, a spirited woman who ran a family inn in Bonnieux. Under her tutelage I learned to knead dough for fougasse, to lay a ratatouille with precision, and to fold pâte brisée for tarte aux fruits. As I chopped, stirred, and tasted, I realized that creating something by hand, mixing flour and water, coaxing flavors to bloom, offered a kind of meditation. It grounded me in the present in a way my fast-paced career never had. Afternoons were reserved for long bicycle rides through lavender fields that stretched in perfect rows toward the horizon. The scent was heady and sweet, and the buzzing of bees provided a gentle soundtrack. I stopped atop a rise to watch golden light drench the purple blooms, journaling about the way the landscape seemed to embody both fierceness and fragility. One evening, Chef Camille invited me to a local fête where villagers danced under strings of lights and shared bowls of daube provençale, a slow-cooked beef stew, and glasses of wine from nearby Châteauneuf-du-Pape. I found myself seated next to Julien, a landscape painter who carried a sketchbook wherever he went. He and I traded stories. He spoke of capturing light on canvas, and I shared what I'd learned about capturing life in photographs and words. Under a canopy of stars, laughter rose like incense, and for a moment I forgot I was a visitor. This felt like home. On my final day in Provence, I awoke to find a mist drifting among the olive trees. I took one last walk to the hilltop chapel overlooking the valley. The sunrise painted the sky in pastels, and the silent chapel bell tolled softly, as if blessing my return home. I closed my journal and pressed a lavender sprig inside the cover. With every page, it would hold not just memories of this journey, but proof that I had dared to choose myself, and in doing so had discovered a freedom I never knew I needed. The flight from Marseille back to Toronto felt different than the outbound journey. Instead of pre-flight jitters, I carried a quiet confidence. As the plane banked south over the Atlantic, I thought of lavender fields and red sands and city skylines that felt like old friends. My heart was full, my spirit light. Landing at Pearson International, I navigated customs and baggage claim almost automatically. The familiar hum of announcements over the loudspeaker and the swirl of commuter traffic felt welcoming rather than oppressive. I stepped outside into the summer heat, inhaled deeply, and hailed a taxi. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to apologize for my plans or explain my absence. My solitude had taught me that I deserved this peace. Back in my apartment, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No messages blinking on my phone, no half-finished dishes in the sink. I unpacked slowly, carefully placing souvenirs where they could catch the eye. A small ceramic bowl from Apt on the coffee table, a framed photograph of Uluru's sunrise on my bookshelf, and the lavender sprig tucked inside my journal on the desk. Each item felt like a talisman, a reminder of the journey I had claimed as my own. That evening, I called Priya. She answered on the first ring, relief audible in her voice. "How does it feel to be home?" she asked. "Grounded," I replied, smiling, and a little foreign at the same time. We met the next morning at our favorite cafe. I arrived first and chose a corner table bathed in early light. When Priya walked in, her eyes sparkled. She slid into the seat across from me. "Tell me everything," she said, anticipating the stories I had held back. I spent the next hour sharing highlights, the whispering winds of the outback, the hush of Provence at dawn, the camaraderie of strangers who became friends. With each anecdote, I realized how tangible my transformation had become. After coffee, I wandered through the neighborhood, marveling at how the everyday suddenly glowed with possibility. A street musician played soulful cello in front of a row of townhouses. A couple strolled hand in hand past my favorite bookstore, its window displaying a new release on solo travel. I stopped at a park bench and opened my journal, reading entries I had penned under starlit skies. I paused at a line I had written in Wellington. "I am the author of my own story." Later that afternoon, I met with my boss, Mr. Latham, back in the office. My desk was piled with reports and half-empty coffee cups. Familiar, yes, but no longer suffocating. He glanced up as I sat down. "Jordan, you look refreshed," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The New Zealand campaign went live while you were away, and it's outperforming projections by nearly 20%. I touched the small photo of the Auckland countryside taped to my monitor. "I owe that trip a lot," I said. He smiled, then asked, "What's next?" I took a breath and replied, "I'd like to propose a new initiative, something inspired by my travels, focused on sustainable investments in emerging markets." His eyebrows lifted. In that moment, I realized I wasn't simply returning to my old role. I was bringing the lessons of my journey back into my work. That evening, I attended my first photography class at the community center, a decision sparked by months of capturing landscapes abroad. The instructor, Michael, greeted me with a nod. As I set up my tripod, I glanced around at classmates, some retirees, a handful of teenagers curious about the art. When I snapped my first test shot of the library's stained glass window, its colors shimmering in the late afternoon light, I felt that same thrill I'd felt in Provence and New Zealand. In the weeks that followed, my routine settled into a new rhythm. Workdays punctuated by walks in the park, weekend photo outings, dinners with Priya, and friends where I no longer asked permission to leave early. Family invitations trickled in, a barbecue here, a birthday brunch there, always extended with genuine warmth rather than obligation. I navigated these with honest boundaries, declining when my schedule or energy didn't allow, and accepting wholeheartedly when I wanted to be present. One Sunday morning, I found myself at my parents' house in Guelph. The air was cool, the lawn dotted with dandelions. Damien tossed a football to his 2-year-old son, while Marjorie set iced tea on the patio table. When I arrived, they greeted me with genuine smiles. In that quiet moment, I realized that by choosing myself, I had given my family the chance to choose me anew, on terms of respect and authenticity. And as I walked back to my car under the vast Ontario sky, I carried with me the knowledge that this wasn't an end but a beginning, a life authored by my own hands, guided by the landscapes I'd explored and the boundaries I'd claimed. As summer turned into early autumn, the rhythms of my life settled into a new cadence, one that balanced work, creativity, and meaningful connections. Each morning I rose before dawn to practice photography along the waterfront trail, the soft pink light gilding willow trees and rippling across the lake. I captured these moments with deliberate intention, savoring the play of shadow and glow and reminding myself of the importance of presence. One Saturday afternoon, I received a message from my mother. It was brief and unadorned. "We're hosting Sunday brunch. We'd love for you to join us." No guilt-laden pleas, no mention of past conflicts, just a simple invitation. I paused before replying, reviewing my calendar. I did not have client meetings that morning, nor was I booked for photo editing. I felt a gentle nudge of warmth at the thought of returning, and I typed back, "I'd love to. See you then." Walking into my parents' dining room the next day, I was greeted by the subtle fragrance of cinnamon pancakes and fresh berries. My father stood at the griddle, flipping fluffy cakes with a practiced hand, while my mother arranged bowls of fruit and yogurt. Damien and his young son played quietly with building blocks on the living room rug. The scene felt familiar, yet softly transformed, like a song I knew by heart, but with new harmonies. I pulled up a chair and poured myself a cup of coffee. The conversation was light. My father asked about my latest photography class. My mother inquired about the sustainable investment proposal I had pitched at work. Damien shared a funny anecdote about toddler milestones, and his wife offered me a slice of homemade quiche. There were no silent expectations, only genuine interest. I realized that boundaries, once set, can heal rifts and foster deeper understanding. Later in the afternoon, I stepped outside onto the porch to catch some fresh air. My mother joined me, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. We sat side by side on the wooden swing, its chains creaking softly. For a moment, we simply watched the dappled sunlight through the maples. Then she turned to me. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice gentle, "about how I raised you and Damien. I realize now I leaned on you in ways I didn't intend, to be the peacemaker, the responsible one. I'm sorry for that." Her apology took my breath away. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," I said. "I needed you to understand that." We sat together in a comfortable silence, both of us aware that this moment was a subtle yet profound turning point. That evening, back in my apartment, I reflected on the day. The shift in my family was not instant or magical. It was built on honest communication and the willingness to respect each other's choices. I paged through my journal, reading entries about courage, self-discovery, and renewal. Each memory felt like a stepping stone on a path I was still forging. In the following weeks, my new equilibrium revealed itself at work as well. My sustainable investment initiative gained traction, and I was invited to lead a cross-department task force. I found myself drawing on lessons learned abroad, valuing different perspectives, embracing uncertainty, and building trust. My colleagues noticed a change too. One afternoon, Jessica from accounting popped her head into my office. "Your report was excellent," she said. "I can see you infused it with genuine passion." I smiled and nodded, grateful that my personal growth was resonating professionally. As November approached, I received another family invitation, Thanksgiving dinner at Mum and Dad's. "No pressure if you have other plans," I replied immediately. "Count me in." And as the holiday neared, I realized something fundamental. Choosing myself had not meant abandoning my family. It had meant redefining our relationships on terms of mutual respect, honesty, and love. For the first time, I looked forward to gathering around the table, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely wanted to be present, just as I had chosen to be present for myself. Thanksgiving arrived with its familiar aromas: spiced pumpkin, roasting turkey, and the sweet tang of cranberry sauce. I approached my parents' house with a lightness I could feel in my chest. Gone was the familiar knot of dread I'd once carried to family gatherings. Instead, I felt curious, eager to see how far my relationships had grown. Inside, the dining room was warm and fragrant. My mother set a bowl of buttery mashed potatoes on the table, and my father carved the turkey with practiced precision. Damien and his son plopped colourful pilgrims and turkeys onto paper plates, their laughter bright and easy. I took my seat at the head of the table, a gesture my parents surprised me with, and poured myself a glass of sparkling cider. We began with traditional grace, but the tone that followed was far from ritual. Conversation flowed freely. My mother asked about a new photo series I was planning, and I shared my ideas for capturing winter light on urban rooftops. My father recounted a recent fishing trip, inviting me along next spring. Damien chimed in about his son's preschool holiday program and asked if I'd like to help with crafts. Each invitation felt genuine, untainted by expectation. When dessert arrived, a homemade pecan pie with a lattice crust, I realized how novel this moment was. There were no guilt-laden glances, no silent judgments about my choices. Instead, there was companionship built on mutual respect. I caught my mother's eye across the table, and she gave me a small nod of approval that spoke volumes. After dinner, we migrated to the living room, curling up on sofas with mugs of hot chocolate. My nephew snuggled against my side, eyes heavy with post-pie drowsiness. I ruffled his hair and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the chocolate. My parents watched us, smiles on their faces, pride rather than impatience. Later that evening, as I walked back to my car under a sky bejeweled with stars, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Choosing myself had not driven us apart. It had given us new ways to connect. I had discovered that boundaries, once honored, could foster deeper bonds. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly thankful, not just for my family, but for the strength I had found within myself to travel far and come home anew. The weeks after Thanksgiving settled into a gentle rhythm of winter's approach. Mornings came early and crisp, with frost lining the windows and my breath forming small clouds as I headed out to photograph the sunrise. I found new beauty in the starkness, bare tree branches etched against pale skies, the silvery sheen of ice on puddles, street lamps glowing softly in pre-dawn darkness. Each shot felt like a love letter to this city I had rediscovered. One Saturday, I received an unexpected text from Damien. "Mum's birthday's coming up. We're having a family dinner on Saturday. Would love if you'd host." I paused, considering. Hosting meant responsibility, yet I felt ready. I replied, I'd be honoured. That evening, I stocked my kitchen with groceries, hearty stew ingredients, fresh bread from the local bakery, and a lemon tart from the patisserie I had discovered months ago. On Saturday afternoon, I set my dining table with simple elegance, white candles in brass holders, soft grey linens, and a stack of ceramic bowls that caught the light. The front doorbell rang just as I finished arranging rosemary sprigs by each plate. My parents, Damien, and my nephew entered with smiles. Marjorie clasped my hands, her eyes misty. "This is beautiful, Jordan." They settled around the table as I ladled steaming bowls of beef bourguignon into each dish, the aroma of red wine, mushrooms, and tender meat filling the room. Conversation flowed easily. My father regaled us with stories of his childhood in Guelph. Damien teased my mother about her newly acquired knitting hobby, and my nephew asked endless questions about the flickering candle flames. As dessert plates appeared, lemon tart slices dusted with powdered sugar, I caught Damien's eye. He raised his fork in a silent toast, and I knew that under the surface of our playful banter lay gratitude for the connection we had rebuilt. When the dishes were cleared, we piled into the living room, where a cozy fire crackled. My mother produced a photo album from the coffee table, a collection of images spanning decades. Instead of guilt-tripping captions, she had added playful notes. Jordan's first piano recital, alongside a beaming toddler. Family Vacation 2005, with siblings squinting against a beach sunset. She passed the album to me with a gentle smile. "I thought you might enjoy this." My heart swelled as I turned each page. The photos reminded me that our history together was rich and complex, marked by both missteps and love. When we closed the album, my mother slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you for hosting," she whispered. Driving home later, the tail lights of passing cars left trails of light in the falling snow. I thought of Tuscany's rolling hills and the warmth of Provence's kitchens, but also of this moment, small, simple, yet profound. I had chosen myself and found the courage to reshape my place in the family. Now, as I looked forward to the holidays ahead, I knew that the bonds I cherished were no longer held together by obligation alone, but by genuine respect and affection. And in that realization, I felt content, grateful for the journey that had led me here, and excited for the unwritten chapters yet to come. Winter deepened into January as the world outside donned a white coat of snow. The city's park paths glistened under a blanket of frost, and lampposts cast golden halos on the glistening sidewalks. I bundled up in my navy peacoat and wool scarf, camera slung over one shoulder and journal in my pocket, determined to capture beauty in the hush of winter. One Sunday afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Chef Camille in Provence, inviting me back to apprentice on a special truffle hunting excursion. The invitation felt like a tender echo of my journey abroad, and an affirmation that the experiences I'd gathered were becoming part of who I was. Normally I might have hesitated, but now I trusted my instincts. I replied with an eager yes. That decision set off a flurry of planning and anticipation, but before I left again, I wanted to share warmth at home. My photography class was hosting a small exhibit at the Community Art Centre, showcasing winter landscapes. I submitted 5 of my favourite shots: a frost-laced bench at dawn, a frozen fountain in the botanical gardens, and the silhouette of a lone walker beneath bare branches. On opening night, I arrived to find neighbours and friends milling around the gallery walls. To my delight, many stopped before my photographs with genuine admiration. A retired teacher commented on how the images made her feel as though she could step into the scene, while a teenager asked about my process. I realized that by choosing to step into my own story, I was now inspiring others to find beauty in the world around them. Days later, I made my way to Provence once more. The contrast between Toronto's icy streets and the mild winter of southern France was striking. I traded my heavy coat for a lighter jacket and boarded a van that carried our small group into the truffle woodlands near Castellet. We moved silently among ancient oak trees, guided by local hunters and their keen-nosed dogs. The earth was damp and rich beneath our boots, and each telltale paw scratch elicited hushed excitement. When a dog signaled a find, the hunter knelt to gently unearth a dark, knobby truffle, culinary gold. Camille invited me to shave a few curls over a simple pasta dish that evening, the aroma of earth and garlic weaving a magic that no Michelin-starred restaurant could replicate. Mid-February brought Valentine's Day, and this time I was neither alone nor pressured by tradition. Michael, the soft-spoken photography instructor who had become a dear companion, surprised me with a quiet dinner at a cozy bistro overlooking the river. He handed me a small handwritten note. "You've shown me what it means to honor oneself and to love fully. Thank you." I blinked back tears, sensing that my journey towards self-respect had blossomed into deeper connections rooted in authenticity. Back in Toronto, I embraced the remaining weeks of winter with a renewed sense of purpose. I mentored a young colleague at work, sharing lessons about speaking up for one's ideas and seeking balance. I volunteered at the Community Centre Photography Club, helping others experiment with long exposures and light painting. At home, I tended to the potted lavender plant I had brought from Provence, its pale green leaves a living reminder of distant fields. Late one evening, I sat on my balcony with a cup of chamomile tea and opened my journal to a blank page. I wrote, "This is not the end of my story, but a new chapter. I have chosen myself, and now I choose to share that courage with the world." Below it, I sketched the outline of a mountain range, a nod to New Zealand's peaks, Australia's escarpments, and Provence's gentle hills. As I closed the journal and looked out at the city's sparkling skyline, I felt a deep contentment. Boundaries had become bridges, and choosing myself had yielded connections richer than I ever imagined. Winter might be long and silent, but within its stillness I had discovered that my own voice, once stifled, could sing with clarity, even against the hush of snow. By early spring, a subtle transformation had settled into my daily life. The harsh lines of winter thawed into gentler rhythms, and I felt invigorated by both my journeys and the life I'd shaped at home. My mornings began with coffee on the balcony as tulip bulbs pushed bright green shoots through the soil. The lavender I'd tended all winter sprouted tiny purple buds, proof that new growth follows even the coldest season. One Tuesday I received a call from my parents. They'd been invited to a friend's wedding at a vineyard outside Niagara-on-the-Lake and wondered if I'd joined them. I paused, recalling past years when I would have declined out of guilt or a sense of duty elsewhere. Instead, I found myself saying cheerfully, "Absolutely, I'd love to." When I hung up, I realized how natural it felt to choose when and where I wanted to show up. That weekend, the drive along the lakeshore was drenched in sunlight. My mother sat beside me in the passenger seat, humming along to a nostalgic song on the radio. My father and Damien followed in a second car, my nephew bouncing in the back seat. At the vineyard, rolling rows of budding vines stretched beneath a clear blue sky. The ceremony took place near a gazebo draped in climbing roses, and the bride and groom exchanged vows as swallows darted overhead. Over dinner in a rustic barn, we toasted with glasses of crisp Chardonnay. My nephew sat on my lap, munching on cheese cubes, while my parents and I swapped stories of springtime traditions. Conversations flowed easily, no undercurrents of expectation, only genuine pleasure in shared moments. When the band played a lively reel, my mother extended her hand to me. We laughed as we tried to keep time with our feet, the barn filling with our joyous clattering. On the drive home, the sky turned to silk pink, and the horizon glowed behind us. My mother reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I missed having you by my side." I smiled, my heart swelling. "I'm glad I did," I replied. That week, buoyed by the warmth of family acceptance, I approached my next big idea at work with renewed confidence. I proposed a collaboration between our firm and a non-profit supporting women entrepreneurs in emerging markets, an initiative inspired by the bold women I'd met in New Zealand, Australia, and France. My boss gave his enthusiastic approval, and I found myself leading weekly strategy meetings, energized by a purpose that blended professional ambition with social impact. Outside the office, I continued refining my photography. One Saturday, I joined Michael for an early morning kayak shoot on the lake. Paddling in silence, we captured pink dawn reflections on glassy water and the silhouette of a lone heron taking flight. Later, over breakfast at a nearby cafe, Michael mentioned he was planning an exhibition of his own and invited me to co-curate a section. I agreed without hesitation, eager to support his vision as he had supported mine. That evening, I sat by my open window, listening to the soft chirr of crickets as mild air drifted in. I took up my journal and wrote, "I have learned that choosing myself does not create distance, but instead fosters genuine closeness. Life's chapters continue to unfold, each page enriched by courage and connected by gratitude." I closed the journal, breathing deeply, and watched the moon rise over the rooftops, a luminous witness to a story still being written, one choice at a time. Summer heat arrived in full force, and my life carried the warmth of newfound balance. I began each day with a sunrise jog along the lake, the horizon ablaze in coral and gold, reminding me how far I'd traveled, both geographically and within myself. Work was thriving, and my Women in Emerging Markets initiative was gaining recognition at industry conferences. But beyond professional success, I relished the simple pleasures, impromptu coffee dates with Priya, laughter-filled cooking nights at Michael's apartment, and quiet evenings with my journal. Mid-June brought another invitation, this time from my cousin Clara, who was celebrating her 40th birthday with a weekend retreat at her cottage on Lake Simcoe. In years past, I might have hesitated, feeling fatigued by another obligation. Instead, I eagerly replied that I would love to join. I packed my camera and a batch of homemade biscotti from a recipe I'd perfected in Provence, looking forward to a weekend of lakeside relaxation. The drive north was nostalgic, familiar highways flanked by fields of golden wheat and stands of towering pines. Arriving at Clara's cottage, I was greeted by the scent of sun-warmed cedar and the gentle lapping of water on wooden docks. Clara enveloped me in a tight hug. "So glad you could make it," she said, her eyes bright. That afternoon, we lounged on Adirondack chairs, sipping lemonade and catching up on life's twists. Around us, family and close friends mingled, some faces I'd seen often, others who had drifted to the periphery over the years. Conversation revolved around children's summer plans, local festivals, and garden woes. When someone suggested a canoe trip, I volunteered immediately. Paddling out onto the glassy lake, I felt an exhilarating sense of freedom, the entire world widening with each stroke. Later that evening, we gathered around a fire pit as the sun sank low. Cousins told stories of childhood summers spent at this very cottage, canoe races, berry-picking contests, and late-night fireworks. When it was my turn, I shared an abridged version of my travels, highlighting the lessons I'd learned about boundaries and self-discovery. My words were met with nods and applause. Clara raised her glass. "To Jordan," she toasted, "for reminding us that life's greatest adventures often begin when we choose ourselves." The next morning, I rose early to capture the mist lifting from the lake. My camera clicked steadily as swans glided by, their reflections perfect mirror images. Later, I joined Clara in the kitchen, where we kneaded dough for blueberry muffins, using berries picked from her own garden. The act of baking side by side, hands dusted with flour, felt emblematic of how our relationships had grown, collaborative, respectful, and sweet. As I packed my car to leave, Clara clasped my hand. "Thanks for being here," she said. "You've brought something wonderful to this celebration." I hugged her back and promised to visit again soon, on my terms, but with genuine desire. Driving south toward Toronto, I reflected on how far I'd come. Each journey, across continents and within my own heart, had brought me closer to living authentically. No longer confined by others' expectations, I now shaped my life around meaningful connections and purpose. And as the cottage faded in my rearview mirror, I knew that the next chapters would continue to unfold, guided by the same courage that had first propelled me out the door. By late summer, my life throbbed with a vibrant sense of purpose and connection I had never known before. Mornings began with the same ritual, a cup of black tea on my balcony as I reviewed the day's plans, client meetings, gallery walkthroughs, and occasional photo sessions along the waterfront. But now, between each obligation, I carved out pockets of time for reflection, creativity, and unhurried conversation. One Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from my boss, Mr. Latham. "The board has approved our partnership with the Women's Entrepreneurship Fund. They want you to present at the next Global Summit in New York. Are you interested?" I paused, considering the offer. In my old life, public speaking on an international stage would have filled me with dread. Now I felt a surge of confidence. I replied, absolutely, I'd be honored. The following week I flew to New York City, a place I had visited once with my family decades ago, but which now felt unfamiliar and full of opportunity. The day of my presentation, I stood backstage at a sleek conference center, nerves fluttering like butterflies. I closed my eyes and envisioned the landscapes I had traversed, the icy mist of Rotorua, the luminous field of light in the Australian outback, lavender fields at dawn. Drawing strength from those memories, I stepped into the spotlight and shared my vision for sustainable investment, speaking not just from my career expertise, but from the lived experiences that had shaped my conviction. When I finished, the audience erupted into applause. Several attendees approached me afterward, eager to collaborate. As I stepped off the dais, I felt exhilarated and deeply grateful for the journey that had led me here. Returning to Toronto, I brought home more than souvenirs. I carried a renewed sense of what I could achieve when I honored my own path. At work, I integrated lessons from the summit into our firm's strategy, mentoring junior colleagues on how to leverage personal passions for professional impact. I hosted lunchtime workshops on storytelling, encouraging others to share their own journeys of choice to inspire authentic leadership. At home, autumn's arrival painted the city in golds and reds. I joined Michael for a weekend getaway to a nearby maple farm. Under clear skies, we sampled freshly tapped syrup, rode a hay wagon through Orchard Rows, and warmed our hands by a crackling bonfire. Michael teased me gently as I snapped photos of each moment, reminding me that I no longer lived to document life's beauty. I lived in it. One crisp October evening, I received a card in the mail, an invitation to my parents' 40th wedding anniversary celebration. It was elegantly embossed with a simple line beneath, "We hope you'll join us in commemorating 4 decades of love." No guilt, no qualifiers, just an open invitation. I smiled and RSVP'd without hesitation. On the night of the anniversary, my parents hosted a modest reception at the community hall where they first met. As I walked into the warmly lit room, I saw old friends, neighbors, and colleagues mingling with my family. My parents greeted me at the door with genuine delight. My mother's eyes shone as she placed a corsage on my lapel. My father clasped my hand firmly, pride evident in his gaze. We spent the evening sharing toasts and dancing to songs from the era they married. When the DJ played their wedding waltz, my father extended his hand to me. Together, we circled the dance floor, the years between us folding into the music's gentle rhythm. My mother joined, and soon the 3 of us moved in harmony. Old wounds softened, new respect flourishing between every step. As I stood beside them, I reflected on the mosaic of moments that had brought me here. The solo flights, the whispered journal entries, the heartfelt apologies, and the shared laughter. Choosing myself had not driven a wedge between us. It had opened space for honesty, growth, and mutual celebration. That night, beneath a canopy of autumn leaves, I understood that life's richest adventures often begin not with grand gestures, but with a single choice to honor one's own voice. And in that choice, we discover the freedom to return home and to love more fully than ever before. As November's chill turned to December's early frost, I found myself reflecting on the year's journey while sipping hot cocoa beside my living room window. Outside, the cityscape shimmered with holiday lights, and the distant hum of traffic blended with occasional laughter drifting up from the street. I realized how profoundly my life had shifted from dutifully sacrificing myself for others to intentionally crafting a life that balanced personal growth, meaningful connections, and celebration of both solitude and togetherness. A few days before Christmas, I received a message from Clara, inviting me to join a small family gathering at her cottage once more. She wanted to bake holiday treats and take our annual winter walk through the snow-laden woods. I accepted eagerly, knowing that the tradition now carried new significance. It symbolized how far we had all come in honoring each other's needs. Arriving at the cottage, I was greeted by the crisp scent of pine and the warmth of the stone fireplace ablaze with crackling logs. Clara handed me a steaming mug of spiced cider as we donned mittens and thick scarves for our walk. The woods were hushed under fresh snowfall. Each step crunched softly, and our breaths rose in little clouds. We collected pine cones and holly sprigs, pressing them into my pockets to decorate my apartment when I returned. In that quiet companionship, I felt the gentle rhythm of shared tradition, unchanged in form, but enriched in feeling. That evening, back indoors, we baked sugar cookies decorated with colored icing and sprinkles. Laughter filled every corner as we playfully shaped dough into stars, trees, and reindeer. When the cookies emerged from the oven, golden and fragrant, Clara served them on a platter alongside bowls of homemade hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. We toasted to family, to choices made, and to the unexpected paths that had brought us here. Driving back to the city the next morning, I passed by storefronts adorned with wreaths and twinkling lights. My heart swelled with gratitude for the adventures that had taught me resilience, for the boundaries that had nurtured respect, and for the relationships that had deepened through honesty. I realized, too, that the journey does not end with a single trip or conversation. It continues each day in how I choose to show up for myself and for others. On Christmas Eve, I set my apartment with simple decorations, a small evergreen tree in the corner, string lights framing the window, and the pine cones I had gathered perched in a glass bowl. I spent the evening reading my journal by candlelight, pausing at the final entry of my travels. I choose myself, and in doing so, I choose a richer life. I added one more line beneath it, and that choice will echo in every tomorrow. As midnight approached, I stepped outside onto my balcony, gazing up at the clear winter sky. A single star shone brightly, its light undimmed by the city glow. I breathed in the cold air, feeling both small and infinite, connected to every landscape I had crossed and every person I had become. In that moment, I understood that the greatest gift of all was the freedom to stand in my own truth and to invite those I loved to stand beside me on new, shared ground. And so, with a heart both humble and hopeful, I embraced the silence of the night, ready for whatever next chapter awaited.